Hello, everyone. Today's book that I'm going to be discussing with you is a real, as us old people say, a humdinger of a book. It's got a lot of elements, and it's kind of hard to describe, so you'll have to bear with me because I don't want to give anything away. This is definitely a book you need to read for yourself, but I'm going to try to tell you what I can. But trust me, it's scary, it's thrilling, it's a page turner. So let's talk about all that right now. All right, the book we're going to be talking about today is The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. This one, in the original publication, clocked in at around 544 pages, I think, and that's normally longer. I'm a little bit tired. It's a little bit longer than what I'm used to reading. However, normally a book that long would probably take me 4 or 5 days. But I actually read it through in two and a half days because it just didn't feel like it was that long, because it was just that good. I was engaged at all times. I was in that world. I was wondering where these things were going. And boy, it did not disappoint right up to the very last page, I can tell you that. At its core, this book is about bringing about the end of the world through interdimensional travel, different worlds, different times in those worlds. Sometimes the characters don't have to ask, which world am I in, but when, what time am I in this world? This is really a hard book to explain, as you're going to find out, because it has so many elements. And it's really about so much more than, it's not a time-traveling book by any means. It's not science fiction, it's not fantasy. It's planted firmly in the modern world where these things are taking place. And it's not about traveling through time to right a wrong or change something. It's not like a Back to the Future kind of thing. This is about evil and bringing about the end of the world. But it's also about abuse and the lineage of abuse some people suffer. It's about empathy, and it's also about hope more than anything else. Against all odds, against all these things happening, keep on holding on to hope, if that makes sense. We're introduced, from the very first chapter, we're introduced to a serial killer, just so you know. There's one of those involved. And this guy is going to ride the lightning. He's going to be electrocuted there in the very first chapter. And he's a numbers guy. He is obsessed with numbers and numerology. And he believes certain numbers have certain significance. And that's where his mind is constantly at. He wants to know things like how many cracks on the floor, like how many people died in that electric chair before him, and just numbers. And we see him get electrocuted. We read him getting electrocuted. But in this book, you're going to come to learn not everybody is who they seem, and not everything is as it seems in our world, because there are many, many worlds to consider in this book. Then we meet the main family, the main core, I guess you can say, of the book. There's a father who used to be a cop in a big city, Nate. Now, Nate's father died, but he was not sad about it. He was actually glad, because there was a long history of abuse with his father when he was growing up. And he refuses to be like that with his son. But his father dies, and he's actually really happy about it. But his father makes him an offer before he dies through an attorney. You can buy my house for $1, your childhood home, and it's yours. He refuses flat out. Doesn't want anything to do with the old man. He's dead, good, couldn't be happier that he's dead. The only thing that would have made Nate happier is if he could have killed his father himself. That's how bad his father was. But then we have Maddie, his wife. Now, Maddie is an artist. She's a maker of things. She likes taking junk and turning it into sculptures and things like that. And she's fairly successful at that. She's also very straightforward. She's kind of like the glue that holds that family together. She's a force to be reckoned with, but she's also a very good wife and a very good mother. And I really love the character of Maddie, especially her foul mouth, because she does have that going for her. It's part of her personality, part of the charm of this character, and I liked it. And then they have a son, Oliver. Now, Oliver's special. He's a 15-year-old boy, and when we first meet him, he's in his high school back in the city, the big city. He's sitting down, pressed against the locker, hands to his head, and he's urinating on himself. The reason for that is because he is an empath. That doesn't just mean he's just empathetic. He can see people's pain, people's anger, people's sadness, and he can feel it in his mind and in his soul and in his heart. And as it says in the book, it's just everywhere. People are suffering, either physically or mentally, and they have pain and anger running through them. He can see it and he can feel it. And it drives him crazy. And they were having a school shooting drill at his school, and that brought up all kinds of memories of real school shootings and forced him to be in this embarrassing situation. So because of that, the mother convinces Nate, Maddie convinces Nate, that for the sake of the child and for her sake, get out of the city. They can buy this house, consider it a gift from his late father, and it'll be good for everybody. So he decides to do that, and he gives up his job as a police officer and becomes a parks and ranger, wildlife kind of guy, whatever you call them guys. And that's what I want to say about the book, because after that, things start happening, and they meet different people, different characters, and the main antagonist, I would say, is a kid named Jake who rescues Oliver from a couple of bullies at a certain point and befriends him. Oliver feels like, this kid, he swears, he takes drugs, he has a gun with him for some reason, but Oliver is everything this boy isn't, and yet he feels a kinship with him, a friendship, a bond that he can't quite explain. But remember what I said, not everybody is as they appear in this book. And I don't want to give too much away, but it's called the Book of Accidents because Jake has an actual book of accidents. It's an old book from the mining company in their town that's been recording every accident that's happened in that mine, from murders to people falling down, breaking bones, losing limbs, losing digits, anything that happened as an accident of sorts was listed in this book. But in the right hands, this book is like a spell book, the book that takes them between worlds and dimensions. And we find out pretty soon that Jake isn't what he seems. But why he's there and why he has that familiar bond with Oliver and others, I'm not going to reveal, because that revelation for me, that's when I knew that this book was something else, man. It was fantastic, the way it weaves the supernatural, the interdimensional aspects of it, the end of the world that's about to happen if Jake fulfills his plan in this world, in our world. And what I really love about this is that the chapters are short and crisp, but they leave you wanting more. That's why I was able to read it so quickly. I wasn't forcing myself, but when you end a certain chapter with a certain character and say something like, and then she looked up and saw a face in the window, and then they move on to another character's predicament, I'm like, well, now I got to read to find out what face. You know, I just have to do that. So I wasn't forced. I wasn't trying to rush through. It just so happened that, like I said, it might be 544 pages, but it just didn't feel like it. Because every page moved the story along, and sometimes the author would make little asides little short chapters about an incident or a person, and then just leave it alone. And for a minute, I kept thinking, well, why? What does this have to do with anything? But then later in the book, something would happen, and it would be revealed, and that little piece of the puzzle would fall into place. Because this is a book with a lot of characters, and they are all fully fleshed out. So the author has a lot of characters to work with and to deal with, and you feel each one, and you understand each one. And it is just a great book. It has so many elements, and it's one of those books when you're reading it and you're in that world and you're occupied, your mind is occupied, everything makes sense to you. But then when you snap out of it, like after I finished the book and now sitting here trying to explain it to you in the real world, it's really hard to say without spoiling a whole bunch of things, and I do not want to do that. This book is fantastic. I definitely highly recommend it. And you just got to read it, man. I'll put a link down below to the Amazon page if you want to purchase it from there. But whatever you do, read this book. It is fantastic. I loved it. Also down below, there's a link to my Twitter feed if you want to join me on there. I'd love to have you. And as always, I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your time with me. I appreciate you guys. I love you. Stay safe. And until we meet again, keep reading spooky, my friends.